If you think all the way back to the call in Christchurch earlier this year, you might, but probably won't remember that I appeared on stream, getting interviewed by one of the LSS devs, Uyang. I had a very fun and great time on stream, but that is not the point of this video. I was watching the stream back, as you do, and I noticed something in the live chat. It's not just this livestream either. If you go on YouTube or Reddit or Discord, you see people absolutely dying to see a PvE mode in the game. And it's not hard to see why. The game's mechanics seem perfectly suited for such a mode, with its thematic hero-based combat, and LSS seems well aware of that. In an article published 3 years ago, the game's creator, James White, announced the company's intention to create a PvE product, designed around having an epic adventure with friends. He followed that by saying that the product is currently under development, and that they are working hard to ensure it is as good as it can be. Even as the years passed, it seems like LSS had never forgotten about their promise. The game's 10th set, Dusk Till Dawn, debuted the card United We Stand, which highlights the mechanics of having specific members in your party, allowing you to gain certain benefits. For those unfamiliar, party doesn't exist in the game. It's not in the rulebook, it's not on any other card, and the studio itself never seems to acknowledge its existence. It's pretty clear for anyone even slightly experienced in RPG games that this card is hinting at the arrival of PvE. All of this hype was pretty intently focused on one of Flesh and Blood's newest products, Smash Palace, which many people were convinced would be the mythical PvE product we were all waiting for. Obviously, it wasn't, and while it is very cool, the wait for PvE continues. All this is to reiterate that the people demand PvE. I dare say it's one of Flesh and Blood's most wanted features. But what is perhaps most interesting is that people seem to have forgotten one important thing. Flesh and Blood already has a PvE product, and it was released 5 years ago. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Liv, or TNTCG, and I make content about my favorite card game, Flesh and Blood. This video has been a long time coming, like 6 months in the planning stage long coming. So in the spirit of finally just getting into it and filming, today's tea is Puka's fiery 3 ginger tea. But before we keep going, I must give a huge thank you to Cash for providing me with all of this information. Honestly, a lot of the video is just me paraphrasing his words. I also want to give a similar shout out to Ian, who gave me some information and also ran and tested the actual event. And of course, I could not make the content I do without my wonderful patrons. Thank you so much for the support. Now without further ado, let's get into the video. It has been said by some that Flesh and Blood is a bit like a fighting game. The mechanically different heroes you play with, the back and forth gameplay, it's all very reminiscent. Of course, I'm far from the first person to notice this. I'm sure most of you have seen Gorganian Tome's phenomenal video essay, Flesh and Blood is a Fighting Game, where he goes in depth into exactly how a game of Flesh and Blood parallels a match in Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat, and how we may be able to better analyze Fab through that lens. But what I want to add is that the similarities go beyond just gameplay feel and mechanics, and extend into full-on references. What do I mean by that? Well, let's set the scene. The year is 1992. You're playing match after match after match. Each game is a struggle, a clash of strategies, a delicate balance of risk and reward. It's a test of endurance, patience, and precision. Finally, after a gauntlet of some of the strongest fighters in the world, your next opponent looks a little different. The year is 2020. You're playing match after match after match. Each game is a struggle, a clash of strategies, a delicate balance of risk and reward. It's a test of endurance, patience, and precision. Finally, after a gauntlet of some of the strongest fighters in the world, your next opponent looks a little different. The beat-up car is a loving, heartfelt homage to the car bonus stage in classic Capcom fighting games like Final Fight and Street Fighter II.
Yes, it absolutely is, and I can actually recall the moment when it was put on the table, James turning to an old friend of his from back in, I think they flatted together in like the 90s or something, and I remember him saying, "Do you remember this?"
It is a forgotten relic, dating back to the game's infancy and only ever showcased once in Calling Auckland in 2020, just 1 year after Flesh and Blood's release. There, it debuted as one of the side events for the tournament. Before I continue, I do want to make one thing extremely, extremely clear. This is not an official LSS product. This is not something that LSS has placed an immense amount of effort into producing for the purposes of selling. This was a fun little thing made a long time ago, and it's not meant to be a reflection of what PvE might look like in the game's future. With that out of the way, the goal of the side event is simple. You have 3 turns to deal as much damage to the beat up car as possible. If you manage to defeat the car by the end of your 3rd turn, you win. And if you don't, you lose. Beat Up Car itself is a generic hero with no intelligence and 100 health, so that means to win the event you'd have to deal 100 damage in 3 turns. But it's not quite that simple. The hero's ability states that whenever a car bonus stage becomes the target of an attack or action that would deal damage, reveal and play the top card of your deck.
Yep, so one person would bring their classic constructed deck and they would be playing against the car, and on the other side of the car there was an LSS employee who would pilot the deck. The car didn't actually draw any cards itself, so there was very little decisions for the car deck player to make.
That's right. Despite not having a hand technically, the beat-up car has a deck of its own. The deck contained 20 cards, made up of 8 dings, 8 dented bodyworks, and 4 metal doors. Ding is a car instant that functionally does nothing. It's a fun little reference to the particle effects in the video game when you attack the car, and I can't help but laugh at its flavor text. Flesh and Blood has a lot of memorable ones, but I wouldn't be surprised if I remembered this for some time. Dented Bodywork is another car instant, but this time allowing beat up car to prevent 1 damage that would be dealt to it. Finally, we have Metal Door, a car action with block 3 and a card text reading. Add this to the chain link as a defending card. With that, you may be starting to get a feel for how the event works. You have free reign to attack the car however you want for 3 turns, with each attack potentially letting it top deck a card that lets it prevent or block out some of the damage. The 8 dings and 8 dented bodyworks are really no problem, but the 4 metal doors can be pretty brutal if flipped at the wrong time. This bonus car stage side event slash minigame had a pretty intense run at the Calling Auckland. The initial 100 life total was deemed impossible to beat, and so the card's health was decreased down to 40 before the event even started. By the end of the tournament, Beat Up Car had a total run of 34 games. Its final score was 31 wins and 3 losses, a record engraved in gold across the card even now. That's right, only 3 players ever managed to beat the car.
It was interesting. I don't remember specifically all 3, but what I do remember was Peter Hu and Jared Fung were the first 2 to beat the car, and I believe Jared was the first person. And he did so by being the only person to realise that you were allowed to show up and play a young version of your hero instead of an adult version. This of course meant that he could play Scar for a Scar with Go Again because the car started at 40. And so I believe he was the first one to win and Peter was the second, and I believe Peter was also on Katsu, and I think there might have been a third on Reinar, but that one I'm not too sure about. There were 2 black envelopes up for sale for the first 2 people who could beat the car, and the first one inside it was they weren't actually exclusive promos, they were cards from the next set. So this is after we knew that the set Arcane Rising was coming out, but we didn't know what classes or heroes would feature in it. This is before anything to do with like arcane damage had been confirmed or anything like that. James White had said previously in an interview that they would be looking at like a wizard class later down the line, but what that meant in Flesh and Blood, most people didn't know. The first envelope actually had a red Life for a Life in it, which was quite exciting for people at the venue to see that it was sort of like a continuation of Scar for a Scar. That was quite an exciting time. and then the second one was a red Voltic Bolt, and that one was kind of the more exciting one because that basically was the first look we had at arcane damage and what a wizard class would do. There'd been a lot of theories about how wizard would work. This was the first time we saw arcane damage. It was really cool because the person who won had these envelopes and was just walking around the venue and being swarmed by people wanting to see the cards. So it was pretty cool.
And that's how the story of the beat up car ends. One event, 34 games. Only one copy of the deck was ever made, and it was never used at an event ever again. I find it a rather tragic little story, even if in the grand scheme of things it was just a footnote in Flesh and Blood's early history. It seemed like such a fun little minigame, and I regret never having the chance to try it out for myself. I think it's easy for modern Fab players to scoff at this challenge. 3 full turns with almost guaranteed on-hits to deal 40 damage, even 100 with a bit of luck, is almost laughable. But we have to remind ourselves that this was from February 2020. This was before Aurora, before Zen, before Dash.io, before even Arcane Rising, which brought along Dash, Azalea, and Kano. At this point in Flesh and Blood's history, you were relegated to just Welcome to Wraith's heroes. And of those 4, only Katsu was really suitable for the challenge. What I find particularly interesting is how the mechanics of this deck work. It's a very simple challenge without too much depth, but it's interesting how the game has created its own sort of rudimentary AI that kinda mimics how an average game of Fab might go, with blocking and such. Again, the beat-up car is not meant to be reflective of what PvE may be like in Fab's future, but at the same time, it's hard not to speculate. In my personal opinion, I can imagine the next step being to add attacks to the deck that is played on the enemy's turn. Maybe items, auras, and even allies. I don't intend for this video to get into make-believe territory, but it would be cool to see LSS take a few mechanics from the Fantasy Flight Arkham Horror LCG, like having a running campaign, branching storylines, and upgrade cards acquired through the specific plot decisions. Of course, PvE in trading card games is not necessarily new. In 2013, Magic the Gathering released special challenge decks that players could fight against in groups of 4. The challenge decks were self-running and had cards that dealt damage, disrupted players, and even put new enemies on the field. Even more recently, we saw Pokemon come out with raid battles and Lorcana with its Illuminaris quest product. That being said, I have no doubt that LSS will come up with something new and innovative, something that stands out from the rest of the industry, as they have always done. I think it can be pretty easy to get lost in the metagame of Flesh and Blood. The callings, the Pro Tours, the rise and fall of overpowered heroes and dark horses. It is so easy, amongst all of that business, to forget the little stories hidden in the margins. Stories like Beat Up Car, strange, delightful experiments, brief moments in time that call back to decades of arcade nostalgia. And even in something as easily forgotten as this little side event minigame, we can see glimpses into what the game once was, what it could have been, and even still, what it may become. I hope you enjoyed this video, and thank you for watching. On an additional note, I've put the beat up card PDF into this video's description. All you have to do to play it is print it off and cut out the cards. You can also put it in front of some sleeved chaff to make it feel a little more real, but that's totally optional. If you guys have the time, I would definitely recommend giving it a try, or maybe even bringing it to your local armory. I think it's a great way to reminisce on the game's past, preserve a little bit of its history, and if nothing else, play it because it's just a fun time. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you in the next one.